Today we're going to tackle one of the most controversial passages in the entire New Testament, 1 John chapter 3. And we're going to answer this key question, which is, do works reveal whether your faith is real? Or do your works justify your faith? And to satisfy the King James Version extremists, I will quote the KJV for the entire video. You're welcome. Let's get started. 1 John chapter 3 says, "Whoever is born of God doth not commit sin." 1 John 3, verse 9. And for many people, that immediately creates a problem. After all, Christians still sin, obviously. Even the Apostle John himself says earlier in the same letter, "If we say that we have no sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us." 1 John 1, verse 8. And only a few verses later, he says, "My little children, these things I write unto you, that ye sin not. And if any man sin, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ the righteous." 1 John 2, verse 1. So, which is it? Can believers sin, or can't they? To solve this dilemma, many people argue that 1 John 3 is not talking about a Christian's actual behavior. Instead, they say John is talking about the believer's spirit man. The argument goes something like this: your flesh still sins, your body still sins, but your spirit, which has been born of God, cannot sin. God sees the believer as without sin, even though they do still sin. Therefore, when John says that the one born of God does not commit sin, he is not talking about your actions, rather he's talking about your spirit or spiritual nature. Now, at first glance, this sounds reasonable. The problem, however, is that it does not fit the context overall of the book of 1 John. Let's begin with the obvious. John already told us in chapter 1 that believers can sin. He says, if we say that we have no sin, we deceive ourselves. Then in chapter 2, he says, if any man sin, we have an advocate with the Father. John clearly believes that Christians can still commit sins in their actual behavior. So if John suddenly changes subjects in chapter 3 and begins talking about an invisible spirit man instead of a person's conduct, we should expect him to tell us. But he never does. There is absolutely no indication anywhere in the text that John switches from discussing behavior to discussing some hidden aspect of a person's nature. In fact, the entire letter is about behavior. Consider 1 John 2, verses 3 through 4. He says, "By this we do know that we know him, if we keep his commandments. He that saith, I know him, and keepeth not his commandments, is a liar." Notice that John's test is behavior, not what a person says, not a person's inner feelings. Behavior. Then in chapter 3, John continues the exact same line of reasoning. Verse 7 says, "Little children, let no man deceive you. He that doeth righteousness is righteous." Again, John points to conduct. The one who does righteousness is righteous. Then verse 10 says, "In this the children of God are manifest, and the children of the devil. Whoever doeth not righteousness is not of God." How are the children of God identified? He says, by what they do. In fact, notice the word manifest. John's entire point is that the children of God and the children of the devil are made visible. They are revealed. They are identified. But if John is talking about a person's spirit man, then his argument completely falls apart. Why? Because nobody can see another person's spirit. If a person's behavior was full of sin, but we are supposed to identify him by an invisible spirit nature that cannot be seen or made manifest, then nothing has been made manifest at all. Someone might reply, but we can see their profession of faith. We can see that they claim to believe in Jesus. But John's entire point throughout the letter is that we are not supposed to judge by words alone. He repeatedly contrasts profession with practice. Earlier he said, "He that saith, I know him, and keepeth not his commandments, is a liar." He also says, "My little children, let us not love in word, neither in tongue, but in deed and in truth." 1 John 3, verse 18. In other words, a person's claims are not enough. John's concern is not what people say. His concern is what people do. That is why he says the children of God are made manifest by whether they practice righteousness or not. The whole argument depends on visible behavior. And it gets even stronger. Consider 1 John 3:18 again, where he says, "My little children, let us not love in word, neither in tongue, but in deed and in truth." Notice that John is specifically contrasting words with actions. He is saying that genuine love is demonstrated through behavior. Then he gives an example. "But whoso hath this world's goods, and seeth his brother have need, and shutteth up his bowels of compassion from him, how dwelleth the love of God in him?" 1 John 3, verse 17. John's concern is not some invisible spiritual reality. His concern is what a person actually does. If you see a brother in need and refuse to help him, John says that reveals something about you. James agrees with the same when he says, "What does it profit, my brethren, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can faith save him? If a brother or sister is naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you says to them, 'Depart in peace, be warmed and filled,' but you do not give them the things which are needed for the body, what does it profit? Thus also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead." As you can see, actions reveal the truth. This is exactly the same argument John has been making throughout the entire letter. Therefore, when John says in the controversial verse 9, "Whosoever is born of God doth not commit sin," the context demands he is still talking about behavior. The question then becomes, what does he mean? Well, we already know what he cannot mean. He cannot mean sinless perfection. Why? Because he already told us believers can sin in chapter 1, and he already told us that if believers sin, they have an advocate in chapter 2. John cannot contradict himself only a few paragraphs later. So what is the solution? The only explanation that fits all 3 chapters is that John is talking about the ongoing practice and pattern of a person's life. Notice how often John uses words like doeth righteousness, doeth not righteousness, loveth his brother, and committeth sin. He is describing a way of life, a pattern, a practice. The person born of God does not continue living in sin as the settled direction of his life. That interpretation fits chapter 1, it fits chapter 2, and it fits chapter 3. The very goal of salvation and the Christian life is not to continue living in the flesh while comforting ourselves that our spirit is righteous. The goal is to put sin to death. John's point is not that believers never stumble. His point is that believers do not continue living in sin as their way of life. Why? Because they have been born of God. Because God's seed remains in them. Because the Spirit of God convicting them and producing new behaviors in their life. Will believers still be able to choose sin? Yes, John already told us that. Will believers still need an advocate to provide grace when they fail? Absolutely, John already told us that too. But the person born of God no longer practices sin as the defining pattern of his life. Instead, he practices righteousness. How do we know that? Or how can a believer have assurance that he or she is right with God? John gives the answer near the end of the chapter. After telling us to love in deed and truth, he says, "And hereby we know that we are of the truth, and shall assure our hearts before him." 1 John 3, verse 19. Notice that. How do we assure our hearts before God? By loving others in deed and in truth. By actually practicing righteousness in our actions. John's point is not that our works save us. His point is that our actions reveal who we already are, whether we are a child of God or a child of the devil. And as we can easily understand, if you are a child of God, this means you are saved. If you are a child of the devil, this means you are unsaved. John likely has in mind the words of Jesus to the Jews in John 8, where he says, "You do the deeds of your father." Then they said to him, "We were not born of fornication. We have one Father, God." Jesus said to them, "If God were your father, you would love me. You are of your father the devil, and the desires of your father you want to do." John 8, verses 41 through 44. Jesus teaches the same thing John does, which is that God is the Father of people who actually love Jesus. And how do we love him? Jesus said, "If anyone loves me, he will keep my word. He who does not love me does not keep my words." John 14, verses 23 through 24. We love Jesus by doing his word. Conversely, Jesus says Satan is the father of those who do the desires of the devil. So, in conclusion, if you want assurance that you have been born of God, John does not point you toward a hidden spirit man that nobody can see. He points you toward a life that shows the righteousness and love of God through deed, not word. That is how the children of God, the saved, are made manifest. That is how we know we are of the truth, and that is how we assure our hearts before him. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to support this channel. It helps us push these videos forward to more people. If you'd like to discuss anything in this video, feel free to use the link in the description to book a Zoom call with me where you and I can talk personally. If not that, please download the Bible Acts app, also linked in the description, where you can find in-depth and practical Bible commentary, a full mobile Bible school, and other study tools to help you grow in your faith. Thanks again for watching. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.